The clinking of silverware against ceramic plates was a sound I used to love. It was the sound of family, of togetherness. On that sun-drenched Sunday afternoon in our suburban Ohio home, however, it sounded like a countdown. Each scrape of a fork, each cheerful laugh from my grandchildren, felt like a tick of a clock, bringing me closer to a moment that would shatter the fragile peace I had fought so hard to maintain. The smell of the roast chicken I had spent the morning preparing filled the dining room, a scent that was supposed to mean comfort and love, but for me, it was laced with the bitter aroma of resentment. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, sat opposite me, a queen presiding over her court. Her smile was as bright as the diamond on her finger, but it never quite reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me. To everyone else, my son, Mark, our relatives, a few close family friends, she was the perfect hostess, the loving wife, the doting mother. But I knew the truth that lurked behind the carefully constructed facade. I saw the subtle tightening of her jaw when I offered an opinion, the dismissive wave of her hand when I shared a story about the past. For years I had been a silent observer of her quiet campaign to diminish me, to reduce me from the matriarch of the family to a live-in burden. And that day, she decided to make her campaign public. It started, as it often did, with money. Jessica's cousin was talking about the soaring costs of real estate. "We're saving for a down payment," he said with a sigh. "But it feels like we'll be renting forever." Jessica let out a theatrical laugh. "Oh, I know, we're so lucky. We wouldn't know what to do without this house." "Of course," she said, her voice dropping just enough to draw everyone's attention. "Maintaining a place this big isn't cheap. The property taxes alone are a mortgage payment for some people." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before she turned her gaze directly to me. The room fell quiet. The cheerful chatter died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside her. He knew that look, he knew what was coming. Her voice was cold, sharp, and loud enough for every single person at that table to hear. "It's a lot to handle, especially when not everyone is contributing their fair share. It's a good thing Mark has a great job," she said, placing a possessive hand on his arm. Then she delivered the final fatal blow, her eyes boring into mine. "After all, you live off us." The word struck me with the force of a physical slap. "You live off us," three little words that erased a lifetime of my own hard work, my sacrifices, my very existence. They were designed to humiliate, to put me in my place in front of everyone I loved. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the eyes of my relatives on me, a mixture of pity and embarrassment. My grandchildren, Leo and Maya, looked from their mother to me, their innocent faces filled with confusion. My son, Mark, just stared down at his plate, his silence a betrayal more painful than Jessica's cruelty. He didn't defend me, he didn't say a word. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. The initial sting of pain and humiliation receded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked at Jessica, at her triumphant, smug expression, and I didn't see a daughter-in-law. I saw a stranger who had invaded my home and my family, a woman who had mistaken my kindness for weakness and my silence for submission. I held her gaze, and for the first time in years I didn't look away. I offered her a small, tight-lipped smile. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was a smile that promised a reckoning. She had just fired the first shot in a war she had no idea she was about to lose. And as I sat there, absorbing the shockwaves of her public execution of my dignity, I made a silent vow. I would not cry, I would not argue, I would wait. And when the time was right, I would show her, and everyone else, who I really was. The meek, quiet widow she tried to shame was gone. A woman she had never met was about to take her place. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." For the rest of the lunch, I was a ghost at my own table. I excused myself from the conversation, claiming a sudden headache, a convenient excuse that no one dared to question. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. The joyful celebration had curdled into a stiff formality. People ate quickly, avoided eye contact, and made their excuses to leave much earlier than planned. Jessica, for her part, seemed oblivious, or perhaps she was simply basking in the glory of her perceived victory. She flitted around, offering coffee and dessert, her voice once again bright and cheerful, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of her own dining room. Mark tried to catch my eye a few times, a pathetic, pleading look on his face. I ignored him. His weakness in that moment was a wound I wasn't ready to tend to. He had made his choice, or rather, his lack of a choice, and he would have to live with it. As I helped clear the plates, a habit so ingrained in me that I did it on autopilot, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were watching a movie of someone else's life. The woman who had lovingly set this table just hours before was a different person from the one clearing it now. That woman had been hopeful. This woman was determined. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of hurt and anger, was now startlingly clear. The path forward was laid out before me, as if illuminated by a spotlight. For years, I had allowed this situation to fester. After my husband Richard passed away 5 years ago, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world for Mark, Jessica, and their young children to move in with me. The house was far too big for one person, and they were struggling to save for a home of their own in a competitive market. Richard and I had worked our entire lives for this house. We'd poured our sweat, our savings, and our dreams into its very foundation. It was our fortress, our legacy. I remembered the conversation with Mark and Jessica as if it were yesterday. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Mark had asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's a huge ask." "Nonsense," I'd said, waving his concern away. "This house needs the sound of children's laughter. Your father would have wanted it. It's a temporary solution. You save your money, get on your feet, and when you're ready, you'll find your own place. Until then, this is your home." Jessica had been overwhelmingly grateful back then. "Oh, Eleanor, thank you, you're saving us. We'll help out with everything. You won't have to lift a finger, I promise." The promises, like so many things, had faded over time. Temporary had stretched into 5 years. Their savings account, from what I could gather, was being funneled into new cars, lavish vacations, and designer clothes for Jessica, rather than a down payment. My role in the household had slowly been rewritten. I wasn't the owner of the house graciously sharing her space. I was the perpetual house-sitter, the unpaid nanny, the live-in cook. My social security checks and the modest pension Richard had left were my own, but I used much of it to buy groceries for the family, to pay for Leo's piano lessons, to buy Maya the new bike she wanted for her birthday. I did it out of love. Jessica saw it as my rent. My in-law suite, which was once my sanctuary, had begun to feel like a cage. My presence in the main parts of the house was tolerated, not welcomed. Jessica would sigh dramatically if I was watching TV in the living room when she wanted to have a friend over. She reorganized the kitchen, moving things I'd kept in the same spot for 40 years, making me feel like a visitor in my own home. And Mark saw it all, and he did nothing. He was caught between his wife and his mother, and he chose the path of least resistance, which meant placating Jessica and ignoring my quiet distress. "You live off us," the words echoed in my mind as I rinsed the last of the dishes and placed them in the dishwasher. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. They lived in my house, a house that was fully paid for, a mortgage-free gift that saved them thousands of dollars a month. They benefited from my free childcare, my cooking, my constant, unwavering support. And yet, in her narrative, I was the parasite. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar shadows of my room feeling alien and unwelcoming. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now fueling something else. A resolve I hadn't felt since Richard died. He had always been the strong one, the one who stood up for us. Don't let anyone walk all over you, Eleanor, he used to say. Your kindness is a gift, not a doormat. I had forgotten that lesson. Jessica had made me forget. I slipped out of bed and went to my closet. In the back, tucked away in an old shoebox, was a set of keys. One of them was for a safe deposit box at the local bank downtown. I hadn't opened that box in years. It held all our important documents, our birth certificates, our marriage license, Richard's will, and the deed to the house. The deed, the crisp official paper, with my name, and my name alone, printed in bold, undeniable letters. Eleanor Vance, sole proprietor. A plan began to form in my mind, not born of rage or revenge, but of a desperate need for justice. This wasn't just about getting back at Jessica, this was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the memory of the man I had built this life with. This was about teaching my son a lesson about loyalty and respect. Jessica thought she had won. She thought she had finally put me in my place. She had no idea that she had just handed me the key to my own liberation. The next day, I wouldn't be making breakfast. I would be making a phone call to my lawyer. The countdown was over, a new clock had just started ticking. The days following that Sunday lunch were a study in strained civility. An unspoken truce hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jessica was unnaturally polite to me, offering me coffee in the morning with a smile that was all teeth. Her politeness was a weapon, a way of saying, "See, I'm a good person. That unpleasantness was your fault, not mine." Mark was a ghost, leaving for work early and coming home late, his face a mask of weary avoidance. He couldn't look me in the eye. The shame was a chasm between us, and for now, I was content to let it be. My silence was not one of forgiveness. It was one of strategy. My first call on Monday morning was to David, my late husband's lawyer and a friend of our family for over 30 years. His voice was warm and familiar, a comforting balm on my raw nerves. "Eleanor, how are you? It's been too long," he said cheerfully. "I'm all right, David. I need to see you. I need to look at some documents." The slight hesitation in my voice was all he needed. "Is everything okay? Is it about the house?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's about the house." We met the following afternoon in his quiet, book-lined office downtown. The smell of old paper and leather was reassuring. I explained everything to him, the slow erosion of my position in my own home, the years of subtle disrespect, culminating in Jessica's public humiliation. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts calmly and precisely, my voice steady. As I spoke, I watched David's expression change from friendly concern to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. "She said that to you? In front of everyone?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "After everything you and Richard did for them, she did," I confirmed. "And my son said nothing." David leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled. "Okay, Eleanor, so what do you want to do? Legally, your position is ironclad. The house is yours, free and clear. The deed is solely in your name. They have no legal claim to it whatsoever. They are, for all intents and purposes, tenants without a lease." "I want them out, David," I said, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. "I want my house back." He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine. "This will cause a major rift in your family. You know that." "The rift is already there," I replied, my voice hard. "It was just hidden beneath the surface. Jessica just ripped the floorboards off for everyone to see. I'm just cleaning up the mess." David spent the next hour walking me through the process. He explained the legal requirements for eviction in Ohio. Since there was no formal lease agreement, they were considered month-to-month tenants. I would need to give them a written 30-day notice to vacate the premises. "But I want to give them 60 days, I insisted. "I want to be more than fair. I want to give them enough time to find a place, to get their affairs in order. I don't want them to say I threw them out on the street. I want this to be seen for what it is, a consequence, not an act of revenge." David smiled faintly. Always the bigger person, Eleanor. Just like Richard. All right, 60 days it is. I'll draft the official notice for you. It'll be more intimidating coming from a law office. The next step was visiting the bank. The safe deposit box was in a cold, sterile room in the basement, the air still and heavy. The bank employee, a young woman with kind eyes, used her key, then mine, to open the small metal door. I slid the long, thin box out of the wall. It felt heavier than I remembered. Inside, everything was exactly as Richard and I had left it. I carefully lifted out the file folder labeled House. And there it was, the deed. A single piece of thick, important-looking paper. I ran my fingers over my name, printed in clear, unambiguous type. Eleanor Vance. Holding that document felt like holding my own history. I remembered the day Richard and I signed it. We were so young, so full of hope. We'd saved for years, living in a tiny apartment, brown bagging our lunches, dreaming of a yard for a dog and a room for a baby. This house wasn't just brick and mortar, it was the physical manifestation of our entire life together. It was where we brought Mark home from the hospital, where we celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where I held Richard's hand as he took his last breath. Jessica's words, "You live off us," echoed in my ears, but now they sounded hollow and absurd. How could I live off them when I was the one providing the very roof over their ungrateful heads? The anger, which had been a low simmer, began to boil. But I pushed it down. I needed to be calm. I needed to be methodical. I made a high-quality copy of the deed at the print shop next door, as well as copies of the property tax records for the last 5 years, all of which showed payments made from my own bank account. I was assembling my arsenal. That evening, I called my oldest friend, Carol. She was the only person in the world, besides David, who I could be completely honest with. I told her the whole story, my voice finally cracking with the emotion I had suppressed for days. "Oh, honey," Carol said, her voice full of sympathy and outrage. "That little witch, I never liked her. I told you years ago she was a user." "I know," I sniffled, wiping away a tear. "But she's the mother of my grandchildren." I wanted to keep the peace. "Peace," Carol scoffed. "That's not peace, Eleanor. That's a slow, painful surrender. You did the right thing by calling the lawyer. What's your next move?" "I'm giving them 60 days notice to move out," I said, my voice growing stronger. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Carol said, "Good for you. It's about damn time you took your life back. It will be hard, but you're strong enough to see it through. Richard would be so proud of you right now." Her words were the final piece of armor I needed. Hearing her say that Richard would be proud solidified my resolve. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for him, for our legacy, for the home we built together. The next few weeks were a quiet storm of preparation. I spent time researching apartments and rental homes in the area, printing out listings, not for them, but for me. I wanted to be prepared for their excuses. When they would inevitably claim there was nothing available, or nothing they could afford, I would have a folder full of evidence to the contrary. I was one step ahead of them. Living in the house during this period was like walking on eggshells on top of a minefield. I was polite, but distant. I ate my meals in my suite. I declined invitations to watch movies. I was creating a clear boundary, a separation that they were only just beginning to notice. Jessica's fake niceness began to fray at the edges, replaced by a sullen, suspicious silence. Mark's avoidance turned into a kind of desperate pleading. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked one evening, catching me in the hallway. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I said coolly, not breaking my stride. "Mom, please," about what Jessica said. She didn't mean it. She was stressed. I stopped and turned to face him. My expression unreadable. "She meant every word, Mark, and the worst part is, you let her say it. You heard her humiliate me, and you chose to protect her feelings instead of my dignity. That's a choice you're going to have to live with. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm very busy." I left him standing in the hallway, his face a mixture of shock and hurt. He had expected me to eventually soften, to let it go as I always did. He was beginning to understand that the woman he knew as his mother was no longer there. I had the official legal notice from David's office, the copies of the deed and tax records, and my folder of rental listings, all tucked away in a large manila envelope. I was ready. I was just waiting for the right moment, not a moment of anger, not a dramatic confrontation. I would do this on my terms, with the same quiet, deliberate calm that had guided me for the past few weeks. They thought I was retreating in defeat. They had no idea I was simply reloading. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. I chose a Tuesday evening. It was an ordinary, unremarkable day which felt appropriate. The truth didn't need a grand stage. It stood on its own. The kids were upstairs, finishing their homework. Mark was channel surfing in the living room, a deep frown etched on his face, while Jessica was scrolling through her phone at the kitchen island, her expression bored and discontented. The air was thick with the usual post-dinner lull, a silence that wasn't peaceful but empty. I walked into the kitchen carrying the large manila envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the decision it contained. I placed it on the granite countertop with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Both of them looked up, startled by my deliberate action. "Mark, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and even. "I need to speak with you both. Please come into the living room." Jessica sighed, a put-upon sound. "Can't it wait, Eleanor? I'm in the middle of something." "No," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It can't." Mark, looking wary, clicked off the television and stood up. Jessica reluctantly followed him, her annoyance radiating off her in waves. They sat on the sofa, a good foot of space between them, and looked at me expectantly. I remained standing. I wanted them to look up to me for once. "For the past few weeks," I began, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking, "I have been doing a lot of thinking about the lunch a few Sundays ago, about what was said." Jessica immediately went on the defensive. "Oh, for God's sake, are we still on about that? I already told Mark I was sorry. I was stressed. It was a throwaway comment." "A throwaway comment," I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. "You stood up in front of our family and friends and publicly accused me of being a freeloader in my own home. You called me a burden. You tried to strip me of my dignity. That is not a throwaway comment, Jessica. That is a declaration." Mark flinched. "Mom, please, let's not do this." "I'm afraid we must, Mark," I said, turning my gaze to him. "Your silence during that declaration was just as loud. You allowed it to happen. You co-signed her disrespect. So you will both listen to what I have to say now." I walked back to the kitchen, retrieved the envelope, and returned to the living room. I didn't hand it to them. I opened the clasp and took out the documents one by one, placing them on the coffee table in front of them like a dealer laying out a winning hand. First, I laid down the copy of the deed. "This," I said, pointing to the top of the page, "is the deed to this house. As you can see, the name listed under proprietor is Eleanor Vance, not Mark Vance, not Jessica Vance, mine, alone." Jessica stared at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Mark leaned over, his face paling as he read my name. "I don't understand," Jessica stammered, looking from the paper to me. "This is our house." "No, Jessica," I said firmly. "This is my house. It has always been my house. Richard and I bought it in 1982. We paid off the mortgage in 2010. When he passed, I became the sole owner. When you and Mark moved in, it was an act of generosity on my part. I offered you a temporary safe harbor to help you save for your own home. It was never a gift. The fact that you have come to see it as your own is a testament to how much I have allowed you to take for granted." Next, I laid out the property tax statements, and these, I continued, my voice gaining strength, are the property tax bills for the last 5 years. All paid, as you can see, from my bank account. The homeowner's insurance, also paid by me. The new roof we had to put on 2 years ago after that hailstorm. I paid for that, with the money Richard left me. I let the weight of the evidence sink in. The colour had completely drained from Jessica's face. She looked from the papers to Mark, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. Mark couldn't look at either of us. He just stared at the damning documents on the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You've been letting us believe," Jessica began, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "I have let you believe nothing," I interrupted, my voice as sharp as glass. "I opened my home to you. I cooked for you. I cleaned for you. I cared for your children. I contributed to this household in more ways than you could possibly comprehend. And in return, you treated me with contempt. You stood in my house, eating the food I cooked, and you had the audacity to say that I live off you." The room was utterly silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock Richard and I had bought on our 25th anniversary. Finally, I took out the last document from the envelope. It was the formal eviction notice David had prepared. I placed it on top of the pile. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse. "That is a legal notice to vacate the premises," I said, my gaze fixed on Jessica. "I am giving you 60 days to find a new place to live. Today is October 15th. You need to be out by December 15th. I believe that is more than fair. It's twice the amount of time required by law." Jessica let out a choked, hysterical laugh. "You're kicking us out. You're kicking out your own son. Your grandchildren, just before Christmas. What kind of monster are you?" "The kind of monster you created, Jessica," I said, my calm finally breaking, a tremor of long-suppressed anger in my voice. "A monster who has decided she will no longer be disrespected in her own home. This is not up for discussion. This is not a negotiation. This is a consequence. It is the direct result of your actions and Mark's inaction. You have 60 days. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them with the pile of papers that had just dismantled their entire world. I didn't slam the door to my suite. I closed it softly, the quiet click of the latch sounding like the final word in a long, painful argument. I could hear their voices rising from the living room, a torrent of panicked, furious whispers that quickly escalated into a full-blown shouting match. I heard Jessica scream, "How could you not tell me? How could you let me look like a fool?" And I heard Mark's broken reply, "I don't know, I never thought she would do this." I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no triumph in this moment, only a profound aching sadness. But beneath the sadness, there was something else, something new, a sense of peace. I had finally stood up. I had spoken my truth. I had taken back my power. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence was mine. The 60 days that followed were the longest and most difficult of my life. The house, my home of 4 decades, transformed into a cold war zone. Every hallway was a no-man's land, every shared space a potential battlefield. Jessica refused to speak to me, her presence a storm cloud of silent fury. If we passed in the kitchen, she would turn her back, her shoulders rigid with anger. She made her disdain clear in 1,000 small ways, leaving her dirty dishes in the sink, playing her music loudly late at night, accidentally slamming doors. It was petty and childish, but I refused to be drawn into her games. I met her hostility with an unshakable, serene indifference that seemed to infuriate her even more. Mark was a different story. He was a man adrift, lost in a sea of guilt and regret. He tried to apologize to me several times, his words fumbling and inadequate. "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have stood up for you. I was a coward." "Yes, you were," I'd reply, not cruelly, but honestly. "And an apology isn't going to fix it, Mark. You need to understand why you let it get to that point. You need to fix what's broken in you and in your marriage. Our conversations were short and stilted. The easy warmth we once shared was gone, replaced by a painful formality. The deepest cut, however, was the impact on my grandchildren. Leo, who was 10, was old enough to understand the tension. He became quiet and withdrawn. "Are you mad at mommy and daddy, Grandma?" he asked me one afternoon, his big brown eyes full of worry. I knelt down and pulled him into a hug. "Oh, my sweet boy, I'm not mad. Adults just have complicated problems sometimes. But no matter what happens, you need to know that I will always love you and I will always, always be your grandma. Nothing will ever change that." Maya, at 7, was mostly just confused, acting out in small ways, sensing the deep unhappiness that had settled over the house like a fog. Seeing their distress was a constant sharp pain in my heart, but I knew that staying in that toxic environment would be worse for them in the long run. The house hunting process was a nightmare for Mark and Jessica, and I'll admit, a small bitter part of me felt a sense of vindication. They quickly discovered that the real estate market was brutal. The kind of home they had taken for granted, a spacious 4-bedroom with a big yard in a good school district, was astronomically out of their price range. They were looking at cramped apartments, small townhouses with high HOA fees, and homes in neighborhoods they considered beneath them. I overheard their arguments through the thin walls of my suite. "We can't afford this, Mark," Jessica would hiss. "My God, we had it all. You had a free house, and you let your mother throw us out of it." "Me," Mark would shout back, his voice raw with a new kind of frustration. "You're the one who couldn't keep her mouth shut. You're the one who called my mother a parasite. Did you ever once say thank you to her? Did you ever once show an ounce of gratitude? No, you treated her like the hired help. This is on you, Jessica. This is all on you." Their fighting was ugly, but necessary. For the first time, Mark was being forced to confront the reality of his wife's character and his own enabling behavior. The foundation of their marriage, built on the comfortable bedrock of my home, was cracking under the strain. As the moving day approached, I began to reclaim my space. I started small. I bought a new brightly colored teapot and left it on the stove. I moved a bookshelf from my suite into the main living room, filling it with my favorite novels. I bought fresh flowers, something Jessica always deemed a waste of money, and placed them in a vase on the dining room table. Each small act was a declaration of ownership, a sign that the house was slowly, surely becoming mine again. The day they moved was grey and overcast, the sky matching the mood. A big yellow moving truck was parked in the driveway that Richard and I had paved ourselves one hot summer. Watching strangers carry our family's furniture out the front door was surreal. The couch where we'd watched countless movies, the dining table where we'd shared so many meals, it was all being dismantled and taken away. The final goodbye was excruciating. Maya was crying openly, clinging to my leg. "I don't want to go, Grandma." Leo just stood there, his face pale, trying to be brave. I hugged them both tightly, my own tears finally falling. "I'll see you soon," I whispered, my voice thick. "I'll call you tomorrow. We'll go get ice cream." Jessica wouldn't look at me. She scurried into the passenger seat of their car, her face a hard mask. Mark was the last one to leave. He stood before me on the porch, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mom," he started, but his voice broke. "Just take care of those kids, Mark," I said softly. "And take care of yourself." He nodded, unable to speak, and then he turned and walked to the truck, climbing into the driver's seat. I stood on the porch and watched until the big yellow truck turned the corner and disappeared from view. And then, there was silence. The house felt enormous, empty, and blessedly quiet. I walked through the rooms, the floors echoing with my footsteps. Their absence was a physical presence. I should have felt triumphant, victorious, but mostly, I just felt tired and a little bit lonely. But as the days turned into weeks, that loneliness began to fade, replaced by a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I'd lost. I painted the living room a cheerful shade of yellow. I turned the kids' old playroom into a craft room for myself. I invited Carol and my other friends over for card games and potlucks. I filled the house with my own music, my own laughter, my own life. Mark kept his promise. He called regularly and started bringing the kids over every Sunday. Our visits were tentative at first, but slowly we began to rebuild our relationship on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. He started going to therapy, both alone and with Jessica. He told me that for the first time, he was setting boundaries with her, forcing her to confront her own behavior. The future of their marriage was uncertain, but he was finally becoming the man I had raised him to be. Jessica never came with them. She wasn't ready to face me, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face her either. Maybe someday, but not yet. One sunny afternoon, about 6 months after they had moved out, I was sitting on my front porch, sipping iced tea and reading a book. My house was peaceful, my life was my own. It had been a painful, brutal journey, but I had come out the other side, stronger, more self-assured. I had lost the illusion of a perfect family, but I had gained something far more valuable, my self-respect. I had learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to teach them a hard lesson about consequences. And the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to demand the respect you deserve. The house was no longer just a structure of wood and nails, it was a symbol of my resilience. It was and always had been my home. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.